My spouse, Mark, had left for a business trip, leaving me by myself in our apartment, and honestly, it was quite a drag. Initially, I appreciated the calm, the peaceful evenings where I could relax without interruptions. The first few days were fine. I caught up on my favorite shows and enjoyed the tranquility of the apartment. I occupied myself with long walks and books I had meant to read. I even experimented with new recipes. But after some time, that solitude went from being comforting to feeling isolating. The days dragged on, and I found myself sitting on the couch, staring at the wall, feeling the emptiness of the space. The silence enveloped me like a thick blanket, dulling everything. I longed for the small things: Mark's laughter, his silly jokes, even the way he'd steal the blankets at night. I missed our shared moments, the everyday conversations that made life seem full. I tried to keep myself occupied, but nothing seemed to fill the emptiness. I kept glancing at the clock, counting the days until Mark returned. I considered inviting friends over, but the thought felt overwhelming. I didn't want to feel like I was putting on a show. My world felt confined, and I was beginning to feel the weight of that smallness bearing down on me. Then, just as I thought I was losing my mind from boredom, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find my son, Liam, standing there with that familiar smile that always warmed my heart. He had come home from college for a brief visit, and a wave of relief washed over me. The moment he stepped in, everything shifted. It was like a breath of fresh air had filled the room. Seeing him after some time made my heart race. He seemed so much older, more mature, and I couldn't help but notice how attractive he had become. Gone was the little boy who used to follow me around the house. In his place stood a young man with a charming smile and an energy that filled the room. I felt a mix of pride and nostalgia, remembering how quickly he had grown up. "Hey, Mom," he said, stepping inside and casually throwing his bag down, making me laugh. His voice was deeper, more confident, and I realized just how much he had changed in such a short time. I was surprised by how strong he seemed, both physically and emotionally. "Hey, kiddo," I replied, my voice filled with excitement. "What a nice surprise. I wasn't expecting you until later." "Yeah, I figured I'd stop by for a bit. I missed home," he said, looking around the familiar space as though taking it all in. Having him there, filling the room with his laughter and presence, felt like a balm to my lonely heart. In that instant, I realized how much I had missed him. The heaviness of solitude began to lift, and the apartment felt alive again. We slipped into an easy rhythm, chatting about his classes and friends. I couldn't help but feel a sense of joy bubbling up inside me. This was what I had been missing: a connection, a sense of family that had seemed so distant during those long, lonely days. As Liam settled in, the sound of his laughter filled the room, and I couldn't help but smile. It had been a while since we'd spent quality time together like this, and I was struck by how much he had changed. He walked in with an effortless confidence that I hadn't noticed before. His once boyish face had become more defined, his jawline sharper, and his eyes held a depth that spoke of maturity and experience. I couldn't believe my little boy was now a man, strong, serious, and surprisingly attractive. "Mom, you should have seen my dorm. The guys are crazy," he said, flopping onto the couch beside me. I loved hearing him talk about his college life, about the friends he had made and the challenges he had faced. It made me feel connected to him in a way I hadn't expected. It was like I was getting a glimpse into his world, a world I knew I had to let him explore. But as he shared stories about late-night study sessions and spontaneous adventures, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed in him today. The way he looked at me was more than just the adoration of a son. There was an intensity there, something that made my heart race a little faster. I tried to brush it off, telling myself he was just growing up, but the warmth in his gaze lingered like an unspoken secret. We reminisced about family vacations and silly childhood moments, the stories flowing easily between us. Each shared laugh felt like a thread weaving us closer, and I found myself leaning in, hanging on to every word he said. The atmosphere felt charged with a familiarity that was both comforting and unsettling. Liam leaned back, stretching his arms behind his head, and I caught a glimpse of the man he was becoming: confident, secure in himself. I remembered how I used to tuck him in at night, his small frame curled up under the covers. And now, here he was, a young man exuding a charisma that drew me in. "Mom, do you ever miss those days?" he asked, breaking my train of thought. His voice was softer now, tinged with nostalgia. "I mean, just being together, no worries." I nodded, a wave of emotion washing over me. "I do. I miss our little moments. Life gets busy, doesn't it?" He smiled, and for a brief moment, the room was filled with a silence that spoke volumes. The comfort of our bond wrapped around us, but beneath that I could sense something stirring, an undercurrent of unspoken feelings that seemed to shimmer in the air between us. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once, and I didn't know how to handle it. The dynamic was shifting, and as I looked at my son, I realized I was seeing him in a new light. It felt like I was standing on the edge of something profound, something that could change everything I thought I knew about our relationship. I could sense it, and deep down, I knew he felt it too. The connection between us was deepening, becoming more complex, and in that moment, I couldn't help but wonder where it would lead us. As the board game spread out before us, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just another game night. The air felt different, electric, charged with an unspoken energy that made my skin prickle. I watched Liam as he set up the pieces, his movements confident and deliberate. He had changed so much over the years. What used to be a small boy eager to play with his toys had transformed into this tall, handsome young man sitting across from me. The way he laughed, the way he looked at me, there was an intensity that was impossible to ignore. We started playing, but every roll of the dice felt heavy with meaning. I could feel his gaze on me more than the board. The game faded into the background as the tension between us thickened. I met his gaze, and a wave of warmth swept through me. I could sense the changes in him, not only in his appearance, but also in the way he presented himself, the maturity in his tone, and the way he drew closer, as if the space between us was something he wished to close. I couldn't help but notice how he inched closer, his arm grazing mine as we reached for the same piece. It sent a shudder through me, and for a brief moment, I forgot about the game entirely. I was acutely aware of the heat emanating from him, and my breath caught in my chest. I could feel my heart pounding, thudding against my ribcage as though it were desperate to escape. Was it just me, or was there something bubbling beneath the surface, something that had shifted in our dynamic? "Hey, you're not even paying attention," he teased, momentarily breaking the spell, his voice light, though his eyes still held that intensity. I laughed it off, but internally a storm of emotions was swirling. How could he look at me like that? His stare was filled with something deeper, a profoundness that quickened my pulse. As the game continued, I found myself stealing glances at him. He was so focused, his brow slightly furrowed as he considered his next move. But every time his gaze met mine, I saw it. The desire, the curiosity, the longing. It was as though we were sharing a secret only we understood, a silent understanding that what was happening between us was much more than just a mother and son playing a game. "Okay, your turn," I said, trying to sound casual, but as I pushed the dice toward him, our fingers brushed and the touch sent an electric current through me. I froze for a moment, the game forgotten. "Sorry," I muttered, pulling my hand back as if I'd been burned. But Liam just smiled, a knowing expression that made my heart race even faster. "Don't apologize," he replied, his voice soft and almost personal. It felt like he was inviting me into a space where only the two of us existed. I could see the warmth in his eyes, and I was hit by a wave of emotion so intense it overwhelmed me. In that instant, the board game became something far more meaningful, a space where our unspoken feelings fought against the weight of societal expectations and familial ties. The tension was palpable, and I knew that this playful evening had crossed into uncharted territory. I had to focus, had to regain control, but it was becoming harder with each glance, each brush of skin. As we continued playing, the room seemed to shrink around us, the game becoming a mere backdrop to the deeper connection unfolding between us, an exploration of boundaries, desires, and the complex nature of love that twisted itself around us. The air was thick with an unspoken promise, and I felt torn between what I desired and what I knew was right. As we stepped out onto the balcony, the stars shimmering above us like tiny lighthouses, I could feel the weight of Liam's gaze upon me. The night was peaceful, almost surreal, but there was an undeniable tension in the air. I turned to face him, and the seriousness in his eyes caused my heart to race. It was as if the universe itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. Mom, I've been thinking a lot about us, he said, his voice calm but filled with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. There was something different in the way he looked at me, something that made my heart skip and my breath catch. I know this may sound strange, he continued, but I feel something for you, something more than just a son for his mother. The words hung in the air, a confession both beautiful and terrifying. I was stunned, unable to fully comprehend what he was saying. My mind raced as I searched for a response, my heart hammering like a drum. I had always seen Liam as my little boy, but here he stood before me, transformed into a young man bearing his soul. Liam, I began, my voice trembling slightly. I don't know what to say. A whirlwind of emotions stirred within me, a mixture of love, confusion, and an overwhelming desire to protect him. The intimacy of the moment enveloped us, and I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. You have to understand, this is all unexpected. I never imagined I've always loved you, but this is different. He stepped closer, the gap between us narrowing. I could feel the warmth radiating from him, igniting a fire within me that I wasn't sure how to control. I can't help how I feel, he said, his eyes searching mine for understanding, for acceptance. Every time I'm with you, it feels like everything else fades away. It's just you and me, and it feels right. The sincerity in his words tugged at my heart, and I longed to comfort him, but a rush of fear surged through me. This wasn't just a fleeting infatuation. It was something much deeper, something that could shatter the very foundation of our relationship. Liam, this isn't how it's supposed to be, I whispered, the weight of my words heavy in the air. You're my son. We can't cross that line. He took another step toward me, his hand brushing against my arm, sending electric jolts through me. I fought to maintain my composure, to keep the necessary distance. But it feels so right, he murmured, his voice thick with yearning. Can't you feel it too, the connection between us? I don't want to hide it anymore. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to silence the tempest of emotions raging inside me. It was a battle between a mother's love and a woman's desire. Liam, please, I pleaded, opening my eyes to meet his gaze. I love you too much to risk everything. You mean the world to me, and I can't lose that. As the night wrapped around us like a shroud, I saw the turmoil in his expression, a mix of hurt and longing. I wanted to tell him I understood, that I felt something profound as well. But we were standing on a precipice that could lead to devastation. We need to talk about this, but not now. We need to think about what it really means for us. The stars twinkled above, indifferent to the emotional storm brewing between us. I saw the realization settle in his face, the understanding that we were at a crossroads. Okay, he said quietly, pulling his hand back as if I had burned him. But it doesn't change how I feel. I nodded, feeling the weight of that truth settle heavily between us. It was a moment that could change everything we had known, and I had to tread carefully. The connection we shared was unlike anything I had ever experienced. I had never encountered anything like this before, yet it carried with it the possibility of turmoil as we stood there, the night enveloping us. I understood that we would have to approach this with caution and empathy, finding a way to maintain our connection while addressing the emotions that had surfaced. Liam drew nearer, and I could sense the warmth emanating from him, a heat that made my heart race. His hand found my shoulder, resting softly there, and for a brief moment, everything around us seemed to fade. All concerns, all doubts about what was right or wrong seemed to dissolve in the space between us. I looked up at him, my breath catching as I saw the sincerity in his eyes. Mom, he said gently, I know this isn't what we're supposed to feel, but I can't deny it any longer. His voice, tinged with both urgency and yearning, made my heart ache. I felt something shift within me, a whirlwind of emotions fighting for control. I wanted to speak, to tell him I understood, but the words got stuck in my throat. Instead, I instinctively took a step back, breaking the fragile bubble we had created. Liam, I started, but the weight of the moment held me still. I gazed at him, truly seeing him, and saw not just my son, but a man who had captured my heart in ways I never thought possible. I just don't know how to feel about this, I finally whispered. You're my son. You've always been my baby." The words felt foreign as I spoke them, yet true in a way that made my heart ache. I saw the pain flicker across his face, and it broke me a little. "But you've grown," I continued, trying to find some clarity amidst the mess of my thoughts. "You're strong, Liam. You're becoming someone incredible." He looked at me, his eyes searching mine for understanding, and I could feel the tension in the air, thick and palpable. "Mom, I can't control how I feel," he repeated, his voice quiet yet urgent. "I think about you all the time. It's like I'm drawn to you in a way I've never felt before." Each word hung heavy between us, filled with unspoken truths and desires. "I can feel it too," I admitted, my heart racing at the confession. "But we can't cross that line. I can't risk losing what we have." I looked down, trying to steady my swirling thoughts as I replayed every moment we shared. How could this be happening? How could I feel this way about my own son? It was a question I was terrified to answer. "You're so important to me, and I don't want to ruin that," I added, my voice trembling with emotion. He stepped back, pain written across his face, and I saw the internal conflict he was battling. "I don't want to lose you either," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But it feels so right when I'm with you." The raw honesty in his words struck me, and I felt a wave of longing crash over me, but I knew I had to remain strong, to protect us both from this fire that threatened to consume everything we held dear. Let's just take a step back," I suggested, my heart heavy. "We need some space to think, both of us." I knew I had to be firm, yet gentle, navigating this unknown territory without destroying everything we had built together. "We can focus on your studies, your future, Liam. We can reconnect as mother and son, but we need to find a way to move past these feelings." The words tasted bitter on my tongue, but I forced them out, hoping they would bring some clarity for both of us. Liam nodded slowly, the fire in his eyes dimming, though not entirely gone. "I get it," he said, though I could see the hurt still lingering in his gaze. "But it doesn't make it any easier." I reached out, brushing my fingers against his arm, trying to offer comfort. "I know it doesn't, sweetheart, but this is what we need to do." And in that moment, I hoped we would both find our way through this tangled mess, holding on to the love that had always been between us, even as we stepped back from the brink. The air around us felt heavy, thick with everything unsaid. I could see the storm of emotions swirling in Liam's eyes, confusion, desire, and a glimmer of hope. It was like we were standing on the edge of a cliff, dangerously close to a fall that could shatter everything we held dear. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart, and finally managed to speak, my voice barely a whisper. "Liam, we can't act on this. I love you too much to risk losing you as my son." His expression shifted from hope to uncertainty, the light in his eyes dimming just a little. "But Mom, it feels so real," he insisted, his voice trembling. I could hear the desperation in his tone, and it tugged at my heart. I reached out gently, cupping his face in my hand, my thumb brushing against his cheek. "I know it feels real. It feels real to me too. But this isn't just something we can jump into without thinking about the consequences. We have to consider everything we stand to lose." His gaze dropped to the ground, and I felt my chest tighten as I saw his vulnerability. "What do you mean?" he asked, looking back up at me, hope still flickering in his eyes. I sighed, trying to find the right words. I knew I had to be firm but compassionate. "If we cross this line, it changes everything. You're my son, and I can't bear the thought of losing that bond. We've built something beautiful together, and I wouldn't want anything to jeopardize that." "But what if this is what we're meant to be?" He pressed, his voice earnest. "What if this is just the beginning?" I shook my head, feeling the weight of my decisions press down on me. "Liam, this feels intense. I get it. But we're both in uncharted territory. I need you to understand that I will always be your mother first. We can't just forget the years of love and support that define us. We need to set boundaries." I watched him absorb my words, the realization settling in like a heavy fog. "So, what do we do now?" he asked quietly, a mixture of resignation and frustration in his voice. I took a step back, needing space to think. "Let's take some time apart, just for a little while. Focus on your studies, your friends, the things that make you who you are outside of this situation. We can still talk, still share moments as mother and son, but we need to create some distance to figure out what this all means for us. Liam nodded slowly, the fire in his gaze dimming but not extinguished. Okay, Mom, he replied, his voice softer now, resigned to the boundaries I had set. I wanted to reach out to pull him close, but I knew that would only blur the lines further. And remember, no matter what happens, I love you. That will never change. We'll find our way through this together, but we need to do it carefully. As I stepped away, I could feel the ache in my heart, the sadness of what we were putting on hold, mixed with the hope that one day we could reconnect without the weight of confusion hanging over us. The love between us would endure. I just had to believe that the boundaries I was setting now would lead us to a better understanding of ourselves and each other.